the irony is that buy now, pay later providers are using debit cards to be able to crack in the in-store market.
Right.
It's fascinating.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Merchant Sales Podcast. My name is James Shepard. Thank you for taking time to watch or listen to the show. I've got a really interesting episode for you today. First of all, we start off with David Morris. He is a payments expert, not a payment processing expert, and he is looking at consumer spending habits, different payment methods, and how people are using those. And so we kind of zoom out and take a wide angle lens at our industry and look at how this is impacting ISOs, agents, and ISVs. So it's a really super interesting topic, something we really haven't covered with an interview in this way before. Then, of course, we go to my friend Rich Norton for some sales tips from the field. And then I've got a really cool little segment for you today. So Patty was actually on vacation. So instead of doing the insiders, I was just in Dallas, Texas, and we were doing an event with Green Payments. And so Green Payments had sponsored like a dinner. Some of you probably got an email from me about that. And I just gave a little talk at the end of that dinner. And so we wanted to share that talk with you. So the audio may not be the best, right? But we were in a bar venue. And so maybe a little bit of background noise, but I wanted to share that talk with you. I talk about focus and partnership. And I thought it was really interesting, relevant content. And so we're going to put that into this podcast episode so you can kind of get a sneak peek into that. As always, this podcast is sponsored by Nativia. And so you can head over to nativia.com to check them out. And we'll talk more about them after the interview. Let's dive into this interview with David Morris. Hey, everybody. I'm here today with David Morris. He is the principal analyst and kind of covers the payment side of things at eMarketer. How you doing today, David?
I'm great. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So I was talking to David recently. We connected, and he has a wealth of knowledge around kind of consumer payments and spending habits and things of that nature. And so today we're going to talk about some of these bigger macro trends and how these might trickle down to the agent ISO community. But before we get into that, David, I always love to find out a little more about your journey and your story. So tell me a little bit about kind of what brought you to what you're doing now. It's a pretty unique thing that you do. I imagine it wasn't what you imagined you were going to do when you were 5 years old. So probably something else happened in the middle there.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I actually was a counselor a long time ago, so that's very different than what I do now. I segued into market research, put it that way, about 25 years ago. And
Okay.
that meant, doing anything, numbers, anything where I'd be able to learn how something worked and what the strategy was for growth. I was attracted to. I did a report a long time ago on the funeral home industry, believe it or not.
Oh,
But I was really attracted to learning about consumer payments and made that my focus fairly soon after that funeral homes report. That's the only one I did.
all right.
Uh, and just the mix of behavior of just the technological importance and the evolution of payments, the fact that it really is the foundation of commerce and
Right.
how we engage in commerce. I mean, those have propelled me over the years to stick with that, and through working as a market research analyst and market research director a long time ago. And then I had the privilege of doing some consulting on my own for about 10 years and got to work with banks and networks on some card-related endeavors, acquisition related and otherwise, taking a look at how to be able to launch cards. And then I found this great job. It's been 4 years, I can't believe it,
Wow.
working at eMarketer and being able to manage the content there. It's a dream come true.
Love it. So I want to kind of zoom out and start with a question I often like to ask when the topic is, maybe on the surface doesn't seem quite as relevant to our audience that thinks more about selling payments rather than understanding payments in a weird way. So
Mm-hmm.
for my audience, which is mostly going to be ISOs and agents, and then to a lesser extent, we have ISVs and payments executives. Why should they care to really understand more deeply these payment methods and consumer spending habits? What's the reason that they should consider those important?
I go right back to how you introduced it. I mean, I think in order to sell payments, you have to understand payments. The more
Yeah.
you understand payments, the more you understand shifts in payment behavior, the more educated you're going to be. I think as an ISO, the more knowledge you have, the more information you have to be able to engage that merchant directly and be able to empower that merchant with knowledge is only going to be able to help that relationship. if you look at understanding shifting payment habits, I mean, you're talking about being able to therefore tailor payment solutions according to demographic need. Now, that means customer, but also balancing that with the merchant,
Right.
especially when you're looking at all of the verticalization needs that are
Yep.
at hand, optimizing the payment mix, ultimately strategizing ahead. For instance, if instant payments isn't on an ISO's radar, it better be, because in a
Right.
year or two, you're going to have to contend with that. The customer loyalty component that comes with payments is obviously important. And then you also have the money underneath all of those things, the swipe fee
Right.
funds the industry to the tune of tens and tens of billions of dollars. So any shift there is going to clearly have
Right.
a domino effect on other payment methods and how to be able to monetize them.
Mm. As you look at these consumer, spending habits and payment methods and all of that, we're going to dig into some details on some of these, but at a high level, what are the big trends that you find really interesting right now that you think are impactful, especially kind of the ones that you think would have an impact on the ISO and ISV world?
James, I would make this. I'll start with like a 30,000
Yeah.
foot view,
Right.
and then maybe we can get into some particular payment methods
Yeah.
because I
Sure.
think it'll wind right in there. I mean, you're ultimately looking at a landscape that's been historically dominated by cash and cards. That's changing very quickly. And I think it's the framework to start with is that, cards are going to continue to dominate, and they're going to continue to dominate online. They're going to continue to dominate in store. We think about 60% of payment value at retail by 2028 is still going to be card directly.
Mm.
That's a lot, but at the same
Yeah.
time, you have this explosion in emerging digital payments that you have to contend with. Uh, Wallets, buy now, pay later, crypto among them. Those are the top three
Mm.
things I think we need to talk about if we have time today.
Yeah.
Um, and ultimately, to ensure as an ISO that you're helping the merchant help consumers pay they want to pay, and they're to degrees embracing all of those emerging digital payment methods. So that's I think the
Sure.
crux of the matter.
Okay. So let's break those down. Let's start with crypto. Crypto is always the a very hot topic. It's sexy. Everybody wants to talk about it, but I think there's in the ISO community in particular, I think there's a belief of, hey, is this ever, when is this ever going to hit mainstream? When is this going to become something they should be focused on? How do you see it playing out over the next 3 to 5 years? And how should ISOs, today be thinking about crypto?
I think you put that well. You have maybe 2, 3 years ago, I think a tremendous interest, tremendous wind at the back of crypto, and then you have crypto winter come along, and all the regulatory stuff blows that up. But if you go to crypto users and crypto payers in the first place, it was never really a huge percentage of the population,
Right.
and unfortunately, data that we have at our disposal would indicate that the both crypto users and crypto payers declined. The most recent data that I would cite would be from the Fed, which indicated that about 7% of the population owned crypto in
Mm.
2023, and about 2% of the population paid with it. So 2% isn't a whole lot, but it's
Right.
not nothing.
Right.
And I think the easiest way to answer the question is I think it's going to be niche for the next 2 to 3 years. I think you have rising crypto asset prices that are potentially going to bring back users and they're going to bring back payers because it's ultimately about getting that user to translate that asset into fungible currency.
Right.
And you have the major players, not surprisingly, MasterCard, Visa, and PayPal, which I think would hate to be disintermediated from this potential opportunity. That's
Right.
why they continue to drive with innovation,
Right.
continue to create the off ramps with debit cards and so forth, so that you have people using currency or crypto exchanges being able to pay with that card and
Right.
translate that crypto. But mainstream soon, I would say no. You have the banks still approaching crypto like it's malaria. I don't blame them. And you have
Right.
to have that regulation issue smooth out in order for banks who are inherently conservative to be able to get
Yeah.
on the bandwagon, and they're not.
Right.
So that doesn't mean to ignore it. Uh, As a matter of fact, we just did some survey analysis, and we talked. This is kind of a tongue twister. People who use crypto, but they don't pay with crypto. That's actually maybe 8-9% of the population. Well, why not? Well, 50% say, not surprisingly, that I only use this for investments. That's why.
Right.
But almost as many actually said it's because the place that I shop at doesn't allow me to
Right.
make the payment that way.
Right.
There are people paying with crypto. It should be on ISO's radar, and I think the way to look at that is really as a part of the localization initiative that I know is really an important trend within the ISO community.
Mm. Yeah, it's really interesting to me. I wonder, is there going to be a disruption that comes along? Because I've always felt like crypto's never, in my opinion, done a great job of kind of delivering on its core value proposition, right? So it's, when it came out, it's kind of like, hey, we have this free way to exchange money, and it's frictionless, and there's no government oversight. Well, all of those things are not true, and so it's anonymous and all, and it's like, well, actually, right, it's expensive. There's a lot of friction, and and there's a lot of, now there's government
And
regulation. So
privacy is an issue, and terrorists use it too. And
right.
yeah, there's a lot of kind of contradictions with those
Yeah, it's
benefits.
it's almost like I really have a hard time today thinking of, because it's interesting we're having this conversation. I think it was probably about 2 years ago when there was still kind of a little more of the hype, and I almost did a deal with a company, an exchange, where we were going to really
Mm,
work on pushing acceptance, right? And so
mhm.
let's just pay merchants to accept crypto, like whatever we have to do, like let's just get hundreds of thousands of merchants to accept crypto, and and the ultimate issue it came down to was kind of, why should people use it? And it's like there really just wasn't a compelling answer at that time to say, this is why we should, this is why consumers should be using this method of payment. I just didn't see the value prop. So I'm just kind of curious, like, do you have any other thoughts on that? Of like, is there what's keeping it, these kinds of things, these trends? It doesn't strike me as this like long-term slow. It's like either there's going to be a breaking point and it's going to kind of shoot up, or it's just going to stagnate. I don't know. What are we missing to really have crypto become a force?
I mean, I would go back to solving some of the things you're bringing up, clearly, and I would reiterate the regulatory angle, which I think is the most
Mhm.
important thing to be able to suss out. You know, when you have the privacy versus terrorism issue, when you have the inability for customers to be fully protected, with the
Mhm.
asset, you're not even getting into the payment stage, and
Right.
these are things that are inherently problematic with crypto as a
Mhm.
technology.
Right.
I think,
It doesn't
and
help.
the
It doesn't help
way,
that every news story now is, the some fraud, or this crypto exchange went down, or what. I think that also doesn't help when you have the put that together with the lack of regulation.
yeah, that's true. And I think on the other hand, as I'm sure I mean, every people who are in the news business, they love a good headline, they like
Yeah, of
clickbait,
course.
and so forth. And that's why I think the things to really look at are, are some of these incumbents still looking at crypto as a viable option? Are they still wanting to protect at least the opportunity for them to participate? And they
Right.
they they are.
Yes.
So,
Interesting.
but pushing it past the mainstream, I would go back to that. I'd say in the next 2 to 3 years, no. And I would add, in addition to some of the issues that you brought up, you have a new kid on the block, faster payments. One of the things that blockchain is known for is the instantaneous transmission. Well,
Right.
if you have a real-time payment, uh, why would you want to use something that's already got some holes in it, here?
Right.
So there is that. And if I were to bet long term, I would bet on instant payments, because you're
Mhm.
already looking at a global
Right.
landscape where instant payments they're growing like gangbusters,
Yes.
in everywhere from more kind of capitalist economies like the UK, to
Right.
more kind of socialist driven economies like Brazil and the Nordics. I mean, Switzerland, and this is just something I happened to read, which blew me away, that they're almost cashless, and they will be soon thanks to instant payments. So
Mm.
I see a lot of traction in instant payments over the next 3 to 5 years. And
Right.
that is going to, I think, eat into the interest or viability of crypto.
Yeah, I love it. That's a really good way to look at it. So okay, so we could talk another hour about crypto, but we'll move on here. So
It's
I
funny
want to.
because when I was so excited to be on this podcast with you, and there's a million things to say,
I
how
know,
do you,
right? There's so much.
yeah.
That's how it always is. We'll have to have you back on to dive deeper into some of these things. But let's talk BNPL. So obviously, huge topic, buy now, pay later, another hot topic in the industry right now. And even recently, there's been some movement, regulation. Banks, some of the banks saying, "Hey, you can't pay your BNPL with your card now." So there's a lot of interesting things going on. What do you think about BNPL? What are the long-term potentials? How do you see it as a payment option?
I think it's got a really long and healthy growth curve ahead of it. It's slowing down. It's the novelty, the inherently digital experience it brings, the app-based experience. It hits the nail on the head from a Gen Z payments experience perspective. And
Mm.
it's no wonder that Gen Z's embraced it, and I think is going to help propel buy now, pay later growth forward. When you think about Gen Z, I think it's see if I get this right. By 2028, I love stats, by the way. You'll know
Yes.
this if you don't already. Um, they will make up they'll be the largest user group among buy now pay later users,
For sure.
and they'll be the biggest spend group. I think that you're also looking at buy now, pay later from the standpoint of use case expansion. I mean, this is something that was essentially, I'm oversimplifying, but it's great for apparel, for instance. Those use cases are getting broader and broader, just like the use cases for credit cards are very
Right.
broad.
Right.
So there's a lot of room in terms of being able to expand those use cases. Travel is an example of where a lot of the buy now, pay later players are pivoting. Uh, T&E generally. Um, I think the thing that is the thing that could burst the growth bubble, and I think it already is taking a bit of a toll. You mentioned uh, the the issuers not allowing buy now pay later users to pay with credit
Right.
cards.
Right.
I think that's there's a little bit of a uh, that I think could adversely affect the use of buy now, pay later a little bit, but I don't think a lot. If
Right.
80 to 90% of those loans are paid with debit already. So that's
Right.
one way to put it. I think more broadly, and if you've got a card with Chase, US Bank, uh, American Express, or Citi, you know this already. I mean, they've got their own kind of buy now, pay later programs that are wound into as card linked offers in their in those credit cards, and that's where I think you're going to have some siphoning away from buy now pay
Sure.
later,
Sure.
because you do have most buy now pay later users have credit cards.
Right.
So being asked to choose between the two, I mean, if you can use a credit card that's going to give you the buy now pay later option,
Right.
you're definitely going to see some migration. I think, and
Right.
we already are um, back into the credit card space.
Mm.
I think the potential result there is that you also could have a riskier pool of buy now pay later users left, because you
Mm.
have to have at least decent
Right.
credit to have a credit card in the first place.
Right. Sure. That makes sense. Yeah.
So I think there's a lot of growth potential here. One huge area of growth that is basically just a drop in the bucket right now is in the store. Buy now, pay later is online.
Right. Right.
I don't have, a breakdown on that particularly, but I bet it's 95%, 90%
Right.
online.
Right.
And you're just getting a little bit of traction right now. And um, the irony is that buy now, pay later providers are using debit cards to be able to crack in the in-store market.
Right.
It's fascinating. They're using debit cards with buy now, pay later functionality. You
Right.
upload those debit cards into the
Right.
digital wallet, and you're good to go in the store.
Mm. Yeah. And it's interesting too, because really you think about it. I mean, buy now, pay later, as far as in-store experience, has been around for decades. It used to be layaway program or whatever, right? And so, but it's kind of like almost because of the advent of the credit card, a lot of those retailers got away from that. And I think some of them are starting to realize that, hey, there is an opportunity to have their own kind of buy now, pay later. We've interviewed some people on the podcast that I'm thinking about Enable Finance and some of these others where they have white label programs. And so that's a really interesting one for the ISOs because they, the
Right.
ISOs are probably 80% in store. And so I think that's an untapped market that they could maybe jump into that's really very profitable as well.
Yeah, I was going to mention that. I mean, the white labeling is there's a huge opportunity there, and even just helping retailers promote the in-store option,
Right.
which I think they lag on.
Yeah. So, okay, a couple other ones here I wanted to bring up. One is, what are your thoughts on these kind of, non-bank, entities that are leveraging creative technology? Think about Chime and others that are, giving consumers more of a consumer finance experience of like understanding their finances better and that digital banking. So I feel like there's a lot of kind of innovation happening there. I'm just kind of curious what you're seeing and what your thoughts are on that innovation around consumer. What would you call that? Consumer finance software that goes together with payments. I don't know. What are your
Yeah,
thoughts on that?
financial management, and I
Yeah,
think
there you
there's
go.
been there's definitely been some movement in that regard where you're blending debit with some of that marketing angle, and I think that's a positive. From an inclusion standpoint and from a budgeting standpoint, it's ironic actually, because one of the things I would have said about buy now, pay later is that a lot of that risk that I think people thought was inherent in buy now, pay later, it doesn't exist.
Mhm.
It was never as bad as people would have made it to be.
Right.
But I think you have opportunities here in these inherently digital environments, Chime, for example, to be able to very readily blend, these financial management tools with that core
Right.
payment product. And that's what you're seeing.
Yeah.
I think another uh, something neat that Chime is doing that breathes some life into debit potentially from a competitive standpoint is being able to link it to card linked offers. You've got a cashback feature that introduced. I think it's called Chime Deals. Sounds about
Mhm.
right. Chime
Yeah, I think
Deals.
that's right.
And you activate the deal. You have a particular window of time to be able to make that purchase and then redeem it. So you're talking about merchant funded debit rewards there, which is
Right.
pretty fascinating. And that's never gotten off the ground. There might
Right.
have been a window of opportunity prior to Durbin, 15
Right.
years ago.
Right.
So that's something to look out for. And then I, was thinking of the buy now pay later providers. They're really, the debit cards that I was mentioning there.
Yeah.
So two of them, Afterpay and Affirm, they're digital only cards.
Mm,
So you're looking at, they're here, digital only cards. There's two
right.
examples.
Right.
And those have they have buy now, pay later functionality kind of wrapped into the
Right.
mix.
Mm,
And I think this may be a little far afield for our discussion today, but it's worth mentioning, Visa has come out with this digital credentialing, that ultimately allows you to put a credential in a wallet, and it can be
mm,
anything. It can be a debit card, it can be a buy now,
mm.
pay later, it can be a credit card, and then you can change, shift it, add to it, so that you can have one credential doing any multiple things. And that's, I think, what
Interesting.
you're starting to see with those buy now, pay later providers themselves, inherently
Yeah.
digital credentials that are doing more than one
Mm.
thing.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting, like the sponsor of our podcast, Nativia, banking, they're doing something similar on the business side, right? Like our business uses their debit cards. We have the app. They have digital only cards that you can easily go grab. And like, our employees will use it to, we're going to go to an event and spend $10,000 on something and we'll give them a digital card with a $10,000 limit and say, here, use this, So I just see a lot of innovation along those lines. I think it'll be interesting to see how it plays out.
And
So
I would
what,
add there,
go ahead.
James, just, because
Yeah.
you're right on that, and that's on the business side. There's a lot
Right.
more of the digital only framework on the business side, but on the
Yes.
consumer side, it's
It's
almost
new.
invisible.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you're right. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so last one for you here is, as I was thinking through this discussion today and kind of like I like to think about what are the threads that tie a lot of these things together. One thing that I think is undeniable is this trend of just the smartphone and the idea that consumers, we all have this phone. And so we're starting to see more of the digital wallets. We're seeing, a lot of crypto is like, we have the app on our phone. Buy now, BNPL, there's apps on the phone for that. And
Right.
even I'm even seeing a lot of point of sale companies that are starting to think of the phone as the point of sale. Why do we need this big clunky thing on the counter? What are you seeing trends and how do you see the smartphone kind of tying into all of this?
Yeah, I would say that I think someone back 2000 years ago said, all roads lead to Rome. And I think today all roads lead to the smartphone,
Yes, yes.
I mean, they're becoming consumers' payment method of choice. One way to frame that is, by 2028, eMarketer projects that in-store, this is in-store, mobile wallet payments are going to be something like 1.2 to 1.3 trillion dollars. And a way to translate that is that's about 20% of all in-store retail sales.
Wow.
You know, so the usage penetration is past 60% when you think about mobile wallets generally. You've got the Gen Z juggernaut being on board there.
Hmm.
So but I think the in-store growth is really fascinating. And that ultimately, I think, is going to continue to require the need for payments participants to develop wallet features that can marry the online and offline purchase experience. That's
Right,
still something I think that's coalescing.
right,
But a wallet that someone is going to expect to be used in a kind of a digitally native way across this
right.
omni-channel experience is where we're at, and I think where the problem solving needs to
Mm.
be. You mentioned you know paying via app. I mean, one of the things that I find interesting actually is so not surprisingly via mobile phone. There's about 50% of folks these days that will pay via app in the store.
Right,
There's another minority that'll tap and pay with the phone.
right.
You do have a few QR code users, and that's, I think, well, I think that's going to go the way of the dodo. That's something that actually, from
Sure.
a provision standpoint, if you're an ISO, I mean, where can you kind of help steer your merchants to steer your customers? It's to app and tap,
Mhm.
and away from QR codes, which I think even the ones that are promoting it, like PayPal, for instance, they're going to stop doing that, in my opinion, because you have NFC
Or you got better ways
now.
to do it now.
Yeah, and you have Apple opening NFC.
Right,
Extraordinary. Why
right.
does PayPal need a QR code anymore if they can ride that and be able to use NFC
Mm.
across wallets, which I think
Yeah.
they'll do.
Yeah. Yeah, super interesting. This is also interesting, and I think David will definitely need to get you back on to so many other things I'd like to dive in with you today. But as we kind of run out of time here, this has been so interesting, so insightful. I really want to make
Yeah,
sure that my audience is able to follow you and kind of learn more. Give us some information. How would they follow what the work that you're doing and kind of continue to learn from your experience?
sure. I appreciate that. Well, tune in to anything that eMarketer does, eMarketer.com. I could actually put in uh, uh, something for sales. They'd enjoy it. Become a client. I'm sure
Sure.
eMarketer would love that. But I
Absolutely.
think if you want to follow me, I'd head to eMarketer.com and look for me on LinkedIn. I'd love to hear from anybody out there and make a connection. That's where you can find me.
Awesome. Love it. So again, David Morris at eMarketer. You can look him up on LinkedIn. David, thanks again for your time today. Really appreciate your insights, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.
You bet. Thanks, James. Pleasure to be here.
This episode is brought to you by Nativia, and today I want to talk about Nativia's bin sponsorship program. We've talked about this a little bit in the past. So, for those of you that are actually building and scaling a payments business, whether that be an ISO or an ISV, you really need to think through strategically how you want to structure that payment processing portfolio. And a BIN, a bank identification number, in the context of an ISO, kind of means that you truly own your portfolio. Your portfolio is on your own bin. Now, there are some requirements to that. You have to structure things a little bit differently, and make sure your bin is what's called balanced between low risk and high risk. And so there's a lot of kind of intricacies to it, but Nativia is really an expert in this way. And so people a lot of times ask me, James, why should I go to Nativia, right? What's the deal with your sponsor, Nativia? And one of the things I tell them is I say, one of the main times that you want to go to Nativia, as far as on the payment processing side, is when you really want to scale your ISO. And so you've got an ISO, it's already pretty large, and you're looking at your options and you're saying, okay, well, what should I do here? I need maybe some outside capital for growth. I, might need to restructure and register my ISO with the card brands. And so I need a sponsor bank. I need to explore the idea of having my own bin. These are questions where when you're asking those type of questions, it's time to have a conversation with my friend Vlad Sadovsky and his team at Nativia. And so if that kind of is you can do a couple of things. Go to nativia.com and reach out in that way, or even just shoot me an email directly, james@ccsalespro.com, and just say, hey, James, I heard what you said on the podcast. I'd like an introduction directly to Vlad because my ISO is at a level where I'm really trying to take it to the next level. We're trying to get up to doing a lot of merchant accounts. And so I can talk with you and kind of filter that and make sure it's going to be a good fit. And then I can make that direct introduction. Always glad to do that. So again, thank you so much for taking time to listen to this podcast, sponsored by Nativia. With that being said, let's dive into the rest of our show. So I'm back here with my good friend Rich Norton, and of course, Rich is just hanging out in his car, and we're just recording these back-to-back episodes, which has been a lot of fun as always. And today, Rich, we're going to talk about a word that I don't know if you created it. You're the first person I ever heard use it, but I've used it many times since you shared it with me, and that's the word residualitis. So, what is
Yes,
residualitis, Rich?
that's a great question. I was doing a speech at one of our summits beginning of the year, several years ago, and I was talking about people that stop growing. And I said there's a killer disease of all success. And when you get into that whole comfort level, and it's called residualitis. And what does that mean? It's like, okay, I've got to a certain level. And that's one of the beauties of this business, because we can get to a certain point, whether it's 30,000, we set a goal, 30,000 a month, 50,000 a month, whatever that number is. And then it's like, okay, I've got residualitis right now, where now I'm just going to get in my comfort zone, which is fine. You can do that for a little while. But I've always had the philosophy, and people ask me, why do you keep working? Because my attitude is, you can either keep growing, because there's no other way. You can't stay neutral. Either you're growing or you're going backwards. So what it boils down to really is just setting more goals. If you got to a certain point, that's fine. That can be a blessing, but it also can be a curse in
Yeah,
this industry, because we do have attrition too. And one of the things that I have seen a lot is people do get to a certain level, then they completely stop working. And some have been a year, 2 years, 3 years, and they try to climb back into the industry. And they're like, wow, a lot of things have changed. And you and I have
right.
seen that, especially
Yep.
over the last couple of years. I go back to selling one credit card machine, and that was it. Now it's all over the place, technology everywhere. And they have a difficult time jumping back in, because number one, they've lost their confidence, they've lost the mojo. And that's
Right.
the hardest part of getting back, is getting that momentum back. You got to grind through it. I've had counseling sessions with people. It's like, man, it's so hard. You got to grind through it. It's almost like
Yeah.
you're getting punished for taking too much time off. Stick to it, get back out there, and eventually things will fall into place. But yes, I see a lot of that in
Yeah.
this industry, and that happens a lot.
Yeah, yeah, and Rich, one of the things I've kind of changed my tune on this a little bit over the last few years. I used to talk about kind of, hey, everybody has this different definition of success, which I can completely respect that, and you get to a certain level, and it's like, this is the level I wanted to get to, and all that, and that sounds good, but I'll tell you the problem with that. The problem with that idea is I have had, hundreds and hundreds of Zooms and calls with agents who are very successful in this industry. And I gotta be honest with you, Rich, I'm still waiting to talk to that agent who hasn't worked for a year that's really happy and fulfilled. I haven't
Yes.
I haven't talked to them yet. Now I've talked to dozens and dozens of people who, you would think, well, this person must be just the happiest, happy as a clam. I mean, they make 30, 40, $50,000 a month, in residual income, but they're not. And I've talked to many, many, many of them that are like, James, how do I raise the bar? And so I'll have this conversation with them, and I'll say, well, what are you making now? And they'll say, I'm making 20,000 a month. And I'm like, okay, well, if you were making 40,000 a month, what would you do with the extra 20 grand? And what I find, Rich, is usually they have no idea. And I'm like, well, that's why you have residualitis. That's why you're stuck. Like, is there a charity that you'd like to give to? Is there a different school you'd put your kids into? Is there a different house you'd move into? Is there a cause that you care about? I don't know. Like, so I think this definition of success is, of course, different for everybody, but I think everybody's definition of success needs to include growth and significance, right? So I don't know what your thoughts are on that, Rich, but I've really just seen that,
100%. Yes, yeah, 100%. And if you woke up in the morning, you got a purpose,
Right.
And I look at when my dad retired. My dad was blue collar, was in the Navy, worked building submarines. He retired at 65, and then he woke up in the morning with no purpose anymore. And studies show that most people that once they retire without a purpose, unfortunately, pass away 6 years later. And that's what happened with my dad. And I see that no matter what level that we get to, always have a purpose. And again, people ask me, when are you going to retire? I'm like, man, I feel better than ever. I feel younger than ever. I got more energy than most people half my age. I love my life. I love getting up in the morning. And you make a great point. It's all about giving is what it really is. You find the people that have the most joy in life are the people that give. When you can just help other people. I see when I'm spending time with my family, I've got grandboys, and they're just a blessing to watch them filled with joy and to be able to bless my family and to bless strangers. And you and I have talked, my goal is to give $1 million away each year. And I'm getting closer and closer, and that's no greater joy than that right there. So again, it's way beyond just making money. I've had people ask, how much money is enough? I'm like, well, you could always make more and give it away. Like you said, and what would you do with 20,000 extra? Boy, you can do some great things in this world if you were able to give that away. So it keeps getting better. I always say that.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. So Rich, for those who have been listening into this episode and they've been listening to these, little clips we've been doing, they want to contact you. They want to learn more about what you're doing, about your team, give them the information they need to learn more.
Absolutely. This is an amazing opportunity. If you're the type of individual that you'd like to have a great opportunity and you can have mentors and people around you that can teach you this business, that's what we have. That's what I believe is the difference between us and everybody else. So call me 904-434-4635, or you can email payrock, P-A-Y-R-O-C, payrock Rich Norton at gmail.com. I'd be happy to talk with you.
I was getting ready to talk tonight, and I was thinking about two words that I wanted to talk about, and those words are focus and partnership. These are two words that I think are just really important for the payments industry right now as we move forward. The first concept of focus, one of the big challenges that we all face, I face this, is that there's so much opportunity right now in our industry. There's so much change going on. Do you partner with Union? Do you sell Clover? Do you offer Deja Vu? Right? We'll call out Deja Vu there. Right? What vertical do you go after? There's all these things. And I think if we're not careful, it's so easy to lose focus. You've got to focus on a few things. Number one on my list is prospecting. Okay? We talk a lot about technology. I talk a lot about technology, but guess what? If you're not talking to business owners, you're not going to sell anybody. I don't care how good your technology is, right? So how do you prospect? What is your focus in that way? How are you interrupting business owners with value and giving them something, right? You have to have a way that you do that. But then you also have to focus on what types of businesses are you going to go after. And it doesn't have to be one vertical, but you probably want to have an idea. You're not going to sell everything to everybody. If you try to do that, you're going to sell nothing to nobody, right? So instead, you want to try to focus and say, okay, I'm going to go after small mom and pop shops, right? Or I'm going to go after, auto repair businesses, or, so whatever it is, whether it's a specific vertical or just that concept, you got to have that focus. And then from there, you should be leading from that into a focus on technology, right? You should understand several core systems pretty well, right? If you're placing terminals, you should understand the terminals that you offer. If you're placing point of sale, you need to understand that system pretty well, right? And so don't try to learn every system that's out there. You got to figure out what your focus is going to be, because as we move forward, the people who are going to win in the payments industry are going to be those that are integrated into software that business owners want to use, and you have to understand that software. So you have to move beyond a little bit of your comfort zone and get good at that. Or you can think about partnership, okay? So as we slide into partnership, it's super important, because as we're trying to focus, we're probably not going to be good at everything anymore. When I started selling, it was so awesome, right? I would just walk into businesses like this one, Like 15 years ago, I could walk in here, guess what they were using? Hypercom T7, right? Yes. You know, I would just upgrade them to the new like Narit terminal or whatever, right, at that point. And I would be the one who would sign them up. Like I would close the deal, I would sign them up, I would get the terminal to my house, I would drive over, I would install it, I would plug it in, I would train them, and I would leave. And I would support them. I did all of it. It was fantastic, right? That is not the payments industry that we live in anymore, okay? Yes, there are gonna be some deals like that, but you understand that if you're placing that standalone device, right, that's just a placeholder for the semi-integrated solution or the vertical specific solution that they're going to have. When I was in New Jersey at the last one we did, I told a story about an agent I talked to that he told me that he had, I think it was, I can't remember the number now, but 180, 200 dentists that were part of his portfolio. And over the course of like a little more than a year, it was like 18 months, he lost like 80% of those dentists because they all went to an ERP solution. You know? And it was funny because the context of the conversation is that we were providing him with leads. And one of the companies I own does lead generation. And he was like, don't give me dentists. I can't sell dentists anymore, you know? And I was like, well, you do realize that every single vertical that you're going into in 5 years is going to be like the dentist, right? And it just got very quiet, you know? And he's like, yeah, you're probably right. And I was like, you know I'm right. That's exactly what's going to happen. Like every vertical out there is going to have these solutions that are vertical specific, right? And so again, that focus comes into play, but then also then partnership. What role do you play? You can't do all of it anymore. So how do you leverage partnerships? You know, I think about one of the main reasons who was I talking to? I think I was talking to Hawkins about this, but I was just talking about how, you know, I was at an industry event with another company that I won't name here. And somebody got up that was part of the sales program, and they said, they were talking about, you know, point of sale and things like that. And they're like, hey, you salespeople that are out there and you're selling, you know, point of sale systems. This is like 3 years ago or 2 years ago. And they're like, man, you could get in a lot of trouble doing that because it's so hard to install them. You should probably just be placing standalone terminals. And this is a company I was partnered with. And I was like, you know, I think this may have run its course. I think we need to maybe, you know. And so with Green Payments, I was looking for a company that really took integration seriously, that understands the value of point of sale, right? And getting that right, which is really hard. It's not easy. You know, it's not like placing a standalone. You know, you got to get it right. And, you know, I want companies I can partner with, and I want to bring partnerships to the industry that are like, hey, these are companies that are serious about partnership, and they're serious about playing their role. They're not just saying, hey, good luck, you know? But you've got to rethink your role. Like, what is your role? What do you do? And then where do you need partners to fill in the gaps? And don't be afraid to pay for the partnership, right? In our industry, how do you pay for partnership? You give away a little residual. That's how that works, right? Agents, we talked about this at lunch today. And I'm amazed how many times an agent will like, you know, they have to hire like a full-time person to take on support so they can get an extra 2 basis points. And it's like, that's stupid. You know, it doesn't make any sense. Financially, you're adding all this pain to your life for no reason. Like, what is your strategy and what partners do you need to make this work? Technology partners, right? More important than ever. Deja Vu here, Union's here. Like, these are companies that you need to have that partnership. I think about with Union, the thing I like best about Union, to be honest, is the way that they do the sales process. Like, they do the demo, they do the install, like they do that. You know, that is like crucial, because if I'm gonna go sell a high volume venue, I don't know how to do that. Like, I don't know exactly what they need. I don't know how to demo that. I don't know how to install that. And I'm never gonna know that, right? And you probably aren't either. So you've got to find the right partnership. So again, it starts with focus. Figure out what your strategy is. What are you doing? Who are you targeting? What are you targeting them with? And then partnership. Figure out what partners you need. Make sure that you have everything structured correctly so you're doing what you're best at and that your partners are doing what they're best at. And I think if you can pull those two things together, you're gonna be positioned really well for the future.